Well, I guess maybe I'll get started. First, thanks for your patience in hanging in there this morning. We had a very productive meeting, so I would describe it. The speaker and I have committed to continue to work on developing the language and are hopeful to submit some language to the governor next week. And our request, once we come to that agreement, my request is that the governor call a special session the first week of February. I've talked to the Senate chairs of the working groups, and they tell me they think that language is developed or very close to being completed. So I think it's if as long as bipartisanly they keep working together, I think it's something that can be accomplished.
Yeah, we had a good conversation this morning. I understand the working groups last week all had very good working group meetings and continue to kind of get to a resolution. I have come to the point, and I talked to the governor this morning about this in the meeting, that we feel at this point probably shouldn't have a special session, that we should wait until regular session. We care very deeply about the folks on the Iron Range and understand that they need some relief. The issues that we have talked about, we believe, at least I believe, we can and probably should wait until regular session. However, we do support the issues, and I have made a commitment to Senator Bakk and to the governor that we'll continue to talk and work, and if we can come to an agreement next week, we're going to have our working groups continue to work on language. If we can come to an agreement, we certainly may have a special session. If whether we have a special session or not, as I look at these issues, we're going to extend unemployment benefits on the range. That's going to happen whether we have a special session or not, I'm certain. The real ID obviously is a problem that we need to fix, and we need to fix it soon, even though the federal government now has given us a little more time. I think we need to take action on that quickly. My commitment has been that we'll do it the first week of session if we don't have a special session. So although I'm recommending to them that we don't do a special session, I've made a commitment that we'll continue to work, and if they feel strongly enough and the governor calls a special session, I will put these bills on the floor, and I'm certain they would pass. So
it was a constructive meeting. I would not disagree with anything that's just been said. I continue to believe that we need a special session for the reasons that I've expressed before. The unemployment extension, 26 weeks, I think is just imperative for people who are suffering the range. That's why we have special sessions. When they can be physical disasters, like ice storm down in southwestern Minnesota, or flooding and aftermath in northeastern Minnesota, or the avian flu situation. So when people are really pushed to the brink of total disaster, that to me is when they need government, when they need the government that they depend upon, and I hope that it can be a bipartisan response. As I agree with the speaker, the real idea would be great to, in a special session, to lift the gag on the Commissioner of Public Safety so they can get to work. But the federal government, proving itself once again to be the federal government, has given us what I consider to be an excessive amount of time to get this resolved. But we'll comply with the federal government and we'll work that out. And we'll have time to do so during the regular session if that's what the legislature is willing to undertake. The economic inequities, we talked about a package more limited than I had proposed. But you're willing to accept something that is better than nothing. Though one part that was discussed last week presented by Representative Nabla that I would not accept as part of it would be the extension of the private tuition tax credit the tuition tax credit to private education, and the increase of it, the income limit, which I fail to see how that helps people in poverty in North Minneapolis or anywhere else. But if we can agree within those parameters, and if I get a signed agreement from the four leaders, limiting the scope of the special session and the time during which it would occur, then I'll accept what the leaders here work out.
The language that's being worked on over the next week, is that all three of the issues, or is it one of the issues, or two of the issues, or all
Will
three?
likely be all three.
TV can't quote.
They should be able to see that.
I didn't realize you did television.
I'm thinking of my colleagues.
They stick together, don't
Thanks
they?
for thinking of that.
They stick together.
Governor,
So is it all three? All three will be worked on, continue to be worked on until we get the language. We have to have specific language before I assume before your members can be asked to concur, and I need specific language on the three bills, and I need specific language on the agreement to limit which will also require Senator Han and Representative Thiessen to sign that agreement, that part of the agreement.
So Governor, the Speaker says he doesn't think we need a special session. So is there still a scenario where we could have one, given him saying that?
Well, we can't have a special session without the House. I believe the special session is necessary for the severe unemployment benefit crisis up on the range, as I said just a minute ago. That's why we've called special sessions physical disaster, avian flu. I mean, the kind of, real disasters they go beyond the scope. I realize there are other people who are out of work elsewhere in Minnesota, and they would say, well, why not us? And that should be dealt with in the scope of the regular session. But this is in extremis up there, and so I would call the special session. And given that we would do so, I would believe it should include all three agenda areas. I think they have
Speaker, then could you answer that question? Why are you continuing this if you oppose a special session? So do you oppose it, or you might agree to it?
Let me say it this way. Based on what we're talking about and kind of the limited scope of the things that we're talking about, we feel like, with session 6 or 7 weeks away now, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to bring everybody back in to do this. We can certainly extend unemployment benefits and make that retroactive. We can do that in the first week of session. I've gave my commitment to the governor that we would put that bill on the floor either way in the first week of session. I know that doesn't provide the comfort that folks maybe would like, but we also know that at least 70% of the people on the range right now that are affected by this are accessing the federal benefits, and at least those directly impacted with the mining companies. Why am I continuing to talk? Because I always will. These problems are problems that face Minnesota, and if we can get to a point, I've actually told the governor, call the special session. If you believe strongly in it, call the special session. I'll put the bills on the floor. He has said he wants a signed agreement. I respect that, although I wish we'd get away from that practice. I don't think it is a good practice, and frankly, I think our words ought to mean something around here. So my members understand these issues. I think they're supportive of them for the most part, and I think these bills are going to pass. If they don't pass in special session, they're going to pass in regular session. We're not all the way there on agreement on the language. If we can get there, I'll go back to my members and give them a final, question of yes or no, should we have one, and that's probably got to happen early next week.
Can we make unemployment benefits retroactively, first of all? And second of all, earlier, both you and Majority Leader Pepin had some doubts about the utility of extending unemployment benefits. Are you now on board with the utility of that?
What do you mean by the utility of it?
I think there was a quote from Leader Pepin saying, what does another 13 weeks get us? We have much larger problems. It seemed like there was some doubts about whether that was worthwhile.
Well, I think you'd have to ask these folks, and I think they would say, they haven't had a paycheck for I don't know how many weeks now. I think they would probably disagree. And this obviously isn't a part of the state that I represent, but I think we have to think bigger than our own little districts and think about statewide. And just looking at the legislature and this issue, I think an extension of unemployment benefits is going to pass. Whether it passes in regular session or special session, it's going to pass. So these folks are going to get some relief. That's my own personal, prediction of what I think is going to happen. I think people generally support that. My members do. I talked to Representative Hackbarth. He's chaired the working group on this. He personally supports extending the benefits. I personally support it. I will vote for it. It's not something that costs general fund money, and it's something that these folks need. we're just trying to weigh whether it makes sense to do it in a special session or wait 6 weeks. To answer your original question, do I think we can do it retroactively? Yes, I believe that we can, and I've been told that we can.
Speaker Daudt, if the Real ID issue, if the pressure hadn't been relieved on that, would your viewpoint be a little differently, that maybe you need to come in and do something about that more urgently?
I don't know. Regardless, I know that the deadline on Real ID has been pushed out, but I strongly believe that we need to act, and we need to act quickly on that. If you look at the fact that driver's licenses, there's a 4-year general expiration, and if we're going to replace these driver's licenses over the course of the normal expiration of when they expire, it means that we need to be issuing Real ID compliant driver's license in October of 2016 to meet the final deadline. That means we need to act pretty quickly so that we can get the folks that issue those licenses equipped and ready to be issuing a Real ID compliant driver's license. That's going to take some work. I believe that we can do that all during regular session, but if we do end up having a special session, I think we can take up at least the first part of that very quickly and very easily and repeal the prohibition that allows the department to work towards compliance.
Mr. Leader or Governor, can you address the timeliness of the unemployment benefits? Do they need money immediately today? You just had a town hall up there.
Well, there are a cohort of people who ran out of unemployment on November 30th, and those families are going without income. And there were additional people that happened on December 31st, and another group that it's going to happen the end of January. So the numbers are mounting, and I just worry about those families, and I worry about them having to pin their hopes to a divided legislature. And we all can commit we're going to pass a bill the first week of session, but the truth is what leaders can't control is amendments get offered. And ultimately a bill gets changed, and even if leaders have the best of intentions. And then ultimately you end up in a conference committee. And we may both pass a bill the first week of session, but that doesn't mean it gets to the governor, because they very likely will be different bills. So I think hammering out the language now and doing it and removing the insecurity for these families is the right thing to do. We have an industry in collapse in our state, a very significant industry in collapse with a tremendous amount of uncertainty about when or if it's going to recover. And families up there are making decisions at their kitchen table whether they have to sell their home and relocate. And it just seems to me buying some time so they don't have to make those decisions in a state of family crisis is the responsible thing to do. And I appreciate the Speaker's willingness to consider that. I know I talked with Senator Tomassoni last night, and him and Representative Hackbarth have had very good sessions about that. And it could be at the end of 26 weeks that this industry still has not found some stability, and those families then will have to make those very tough decisions of selling their home, relocating, enrolling their kids in a different school. I just don't want families to have to make those kind of life-changing decisions while they're in a state of crisis. And removing that is very, very important, and every week the numbers mount. And this is about more than just the individuals who actually work for the mining company. I got an email yesterday from a pipe fitter that I know who makes his entire career working on maintenance in the mines. And he does not, is not currently eligible for TAA. So his unemployment's going to run out. There are large numbers of people that don't actually work directly for the mining company, but work for suppliers and vendors that go to the mine every day just like a mine company worker, who now have no employment. So this is much larger than just the individuals who here that actually work for the companies.
Governor, and these are people that, like many big businesses, this is what's happened over throughout this country, is that industries and large companies, they contract, they take work that used to be performed within the company where they had the protections, they had benefits and and now they contract, quote unquote contract, but the sole business of that contractor is the mining company. So just as Senator Bakk said, there are 1,300 to 1,700 people that have lost their jobs and are running out of their unemployment benefits, who are not working directly for the companies, but are working for contractors who work directly for the companies, who 10 years ago would have been within the companies themselves. And so they need to be given this 26-week extension too, which takes them to the summer. as has been said, we have a surplus in the unemployment fund. This is not a single tax dollar involved. This is basic humanity, giving people a chance to survive, to get their kids through the school year. And every one of those dollars is going to get spent in those local communities, in grocery stores, and for basic necessities. And so, it's an industry, and it's a whole, set of communities up there that are dependent on one industry primarily, that are on the verge of collapse.
Governor, what progress has been made since the last time the three of you met? And are you feeling optimistic, or are you getting frustrated by this?
I'm not frustrated. The working groups last week, there was I believe a 6-hour working group on the economic inequities. 60 people were lined up to testify, and others, were in the audience. I mean, the intensity of interest in those concerns is very, very high. The negotiations on the unemployment have gone on first in a working group and then between the two chairs. And the real idea that I appreciate the indications I'm getting that the special session would lift the gag prohibition on Commissioner of Public Safety, especially as the Speaker said, we want to pass legislation in this legislative session that's going to be compliant with what the federal government requires. We really need to start working on that now, so we can be ready for the regular session and have our position, understand what their position is. This is, again, not about, we need to agree with each other to pass these bills. This is about us satisfying the federal government, whether we agree with them or not. I mean, they hold the cards. They're not going to let us on commercial airlines or let us into federal buildings. Then, we don't have any recourse. So this is not about whether people think it's good or bad what the federal government is doing. They're doing it. Virtually every other state has complied. Democrat and Republican governors, Democrat, Republican legislators have put them into compliance. And we're going to have to do it, like it or not.
Speaker Daudt, I'm still confused as to where exactly you stand here. You appear to be the only one standing in the way of a session, and I'm unclear as to what the reason is if you're this close.
It takes a process. Like I said, we have not agreed on language on all of these things yet. I think that we're close, that we could. We also have to convince members that this is something that we need to do. And it's not just me that needs to do that. Tom needs to do that, and the governor needs to participate in that. In order to pass a bill into law in Minnesota, it has to pass the House, the Senate, and get signed by the governor. So this is a team sport. We all, if we're going to solve these problems, we got to all solve them together.
They appear to be on board, and you appear to be prolonging the end.
Well, we are not, like I said, we have not agreed on language yet, and I think there's things that they necessarily aren't agreeing to, and there's things that I'm not necessarily agreeing to, and I'm not saying that we aren't, that we're all that far apart, but these working groups haven't gotten to the point where we have concrete language in each area. So it's very difficult for any of us to stand here today and say, if I wanted to agree to a special session today, I couldn't, because we don't have the specifics of what that would be. I can't sign an agreement today because we don't have defined language. We have to get to that point.
You don't want a special session anyway.
I have recommended to the governor and to Senator Bakk that I don't think we need one. We understand these issues are important. We support solving them, but we believe we can solve them in the first week of regular session.
Although you just
and that's my commitment.
You just said you personally would vote for an extension of unemployment.
I also
benefits.
told
you don't have the language yet. You just said,
Yep.
But you think that if language came up, you would vote for it.
I also told the governor, he has the ability to call a special session, and only he has the ability to call a special session. I told him to call one, and I would put those bills on the floor, and I believe they would pass. And I will not play any games with that.
Do you trust the Speaker enough to call a special session?
I trust the Speaker, but I don't. I haven't heard from 200 other legislators. That's why I signed an agreement. As you know, I could call it, but then it's wide open. And there are other. I don't know all the parliamentary procedures that can be used to extend a legislative session, and I frankly don't want to find out about them in my next 3 years. Every special session I've called has required the 4 leaders to sign, along with myself, the agreement limiting the time that the session can be going, and trying to limit, although constitutionally we recognize we can't, what can be brought up in those. And if the 4 leaders all agree to that, then so far it's held up very well. The so and Governor Plenty, I believe throughout his entire 8 years required the same. I don't know what happened prior to that time, but this is pro forma in terms of how we operate the special sessions, and I'm not going to deviate from that.
Leader Bakk, this has got to be frustrating to your folks sitting around the kitchen table back home to watch this process, which is not producing anything.
Well, what I worry about on behalf of those people that are facing very difficult, life-changing decisions is that the more we delay this, the more likely they end up to be pawns in a larger legislative session. And I've been around this long enough to see that happen. And I don't think it's fair to the lives and the families and those communities to use them in some kind of a chess game during a regular legislative session. And I know that's not what the Speaker would do. But there's 199 others, right, that all have their own agendas. And I have mine. We all have something that's important to us. And I just am concerned that as critical as this is, that they end up part of a larger negotiations, which clearly will take much longer than the first week or two of session. So I just, you know, when the turkey industry was in collapse last spring, we responded. And I remember a case where we had a special session when Marvin Windows' future was really in jeopardy because of some bad sealers that they used on their wood. And we had a special session and we responded because the window industry in Minnesota is big. And we responded with a special session to make sure that Marvin Windows was going to survive and not end up in court and risk their survival. So, and this is a significant industry that is facing a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And I think waiting and putting it into the mix with all the other issues that revolve around the session would be a mistake and really, really unfair to those families.
So we also have not engaged the minority caucuses. And in order for us to have a special session and have a timely one, we absolutely have to engage them. We really can't do that until we know what the language is. So we've got to work towards getting some language. If we can get there, and we need to do it quickly, then we need to engage the minority caucuses. And I need to talk to my caucus, and Tom will need to talk to his to see if they'll follow us and they'll authorize us to sign an agreement.
Is there a deadline now?
I'm meeting with Representative Thiessen. A meeting was scheduled before this meeting in half an hour, so I'll certainly bring this subject up, and I will enlist his cooperation based on the parameters of the language as it exists now. As we discussed in there, I think we were reasonably close. I can't speak for the others here, but I think the language could be agreed upon. If there were willingness to do the session, I think the language could be readily agreed upon, and we could proceed. If not, then we can, it can be dragged out longer and longer. But I'll do my part with asking Representative Thiessen and asking his caucus to be cooperative in this in terms of getting the agreement, asking him to sign the limitations on it, and I'll take the initiative on that.
And
Mr.
for
Speaker,
the three
do
of
the
you-
specifics of the proposals matter if you feel like you can wait until March 8th?
We believe that we can, but do the specifics of the proposal matter? I think they do. We're not all the way there yet on the language. I don't think we even agree on language that would pass on the first week of session. Regardless of whether or not we have a special session, we need to keep working on these issues to get to that point. We're just not quite there yet. And maybe we can get there next week and we can have a special session maybe the following week. I don't know. But I have made the commitment that I'm always willing to talk and listen, and I'll be at the table every time trying to work towards solving these problems. But I've got 133 others that I got to bring along with me. So the legislative process isn't always easy, but we'll work towards solving these problems. And I think that the House will. I think they support these issues, and I think ultimately they want to solve them. But every member cares about every word of every bill, and you never know what it is that issue they are most concerned about. So engaging the working groups and having them work towards the solution was a really important part of the process, and they're not quite there yet. But I do believe, and I think Senator Bakk and the governor agree, that they've had really good, productive working sessions. Everybody's there without ulterior motives or agendas, and they're really working towards solving these problems. And I believe that's the case. We're just not quite there yet. And I think we can probably get there soon, hopefully.
Governor, can you just briefly address the Nicollet Mall situation?
Well, let's end on this particular subject, and I'll open up. Maybe you guys can go into the we're meeting with, on the transportation bill, but not for special session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome to stay around if you like. I noticed you're getting farther and farther away, so. Nicollet Mall, I just learned of this, I haven't talked to city officials about what their options are. It's a very, very important project, and it's very important that it be completed to be in time for the Super Bowl. And I don't, one bid 20 million over, I assume caught them by unexpectedly as well. So I have not had a chance to talk with the mayor or anyone in the city, but I certainly will do so.
What could you do other than talk to them?
Well, I assume I'm not going to comment now. I don't know what the additional price involves. Obviously, if that's the only bid and that's the hard bid, and not subject to negotiation lower, then that's what it is. And I'm not prepared to say at this point. Obviously, I would assume, and I don't know for sure, that would be eligible for the bonding bill. But I haven't discussed that with any of the legislative leaders or with Minneapolis in terms of their priority relative to other projects that I am recommending in that bill. So it's just, I'd say it's just up in the air right now. I can't really give you any more, but I'm willing to see what we can do, need to be done to move it forward.
We're surprised there was only one bid.
Well, all I know is what I've seen in the media, and what it was reported was that was the only bid, and it was 20 million over the expected price. All I know is what all of you have reported.